So I joined the digital transformation agency in June of 2020. So as you can imagine, incredibly difficult time with everything going on around the globe. I came in from a consulting background, as Mira just said. So I was with KPMG before I joined the DTA. Look, the DTA, relatively small agency. We've got about 350 people thereabouts. Again, spread between Canberra and also Sydney. But really came in because I was really just the mission that the DTA has. I feel it's just so critically important, and for me, I'm just incredibly passionate about what it is we do. In my role as the Chief Strategy Officer here, I've got a pretty broad remit. So I have the overarching digital transformation strategy for the Australian government, supporting that whole of government digital architecture. I'll probably touch on a bit around the architecture a little bit later on. Whole of government digital capability, so thinking about the human aspects in terms of skills and capabilities that we need for both now and for the future within the public sector, and also looking at whole of government digital investment. So thinking about the entire life cycle of what is it that we've already invested in, what is it we're thinking about investing in now, what do we have underway at the moment, what are we looking at potentially retiring, and how do we make the most out of all that. So as I said, Rory, it's a pretty broad remit, but it's super exciting.
Yeah, it's crazily broad from my perspective. How do you? There's so many kind of avenues or areas that you could focus on, and government is so broad. How do you define what are you going to do right now, and which departments are you going to work with?
Yeah, look, it is big and it is complex, but I think in terms of what we do as a government, we have policy objectives that get laid down at a political layer, which really does set the direction in terms of what we do. The beauty of having such a broad remit is that everything that I kind of have and my teams have, they're all so intertwined. So if we think about the strategy, the strategy does map up to a policy objective to ensure that, for right now, one of our core policy objectives is about getting the vaccine in and getting people vaccinated. So that's a core aim that we've got to achieve. So the strategy has to align and support that, but really draw a red thread through to everything that we do down at an initiative layer or a product layer to make sure that it maps together. So strategy is informed by the architecture. The architecture, when we think about architecture in government, it's not about just technology. It actually is about thinking about people, process, technology, policy, legislation, and also our alliances we have within the broader market. How that then works, with the capability part that we bring in, how we bring those investments into it. So it's quite an organic beast that's always moving and shifting. But with our focus at the top on those objectives, it's pretty easy to kind of prioritize what we need to do and when we need to do it. It's just complex.
Great. Yeah, I like the link to policy. Is there ever any contention? Because I guess there's multiple ministers. They each have their portfolios. They each have their core aims that they'd like to achieve. Granted, I think the vaccine rollout trumps everything at the moment. But how do you, as a strategy officer, the chief strategy officer, how do you marry up those different policy needs from your stakeholders to align to the vision and the mission that you're going to move forward with?
Well, I think it really is about, again, rolling that right up to the biggest kind of policy objectives. So if I take another one, which is just around cementing the Australian economy as we come out of COVID, that's absolutely critical to what we need to do as a nation. Being able to show again that the initiatives that might be candidate initiatives that are coming through, looking at the impact that will drive and the outcome that it actually produces, sort of naturally triages where the focus goes in. I think, though, as you'd appreciate, as in any large organisation, and government, for all intents and purposes, is kind of almost like a conglomerate. There are always going to be competing priorities, but as we sort of progress down that digital transformation agenda, what we're seeing is there are more and more synergies between the kind of objectives and also the kind of tools that we're looking to use. They might be for different purposes, but we may actually be able to build once and use many, to use a kind of engineering analogy.
Great. And I just wanted people, process, and technology. So on the people side of things, is there ever any pushback? So you're an external agency and you're coming into existing departments and existing teams and suggesting some changes. And I love the quote, everybody loves change, but they hate being changed. So how do you deal with that coming in externally to teams?
No, look, I think it's about, there's a lot of different things and different strategies that we kind of use that I think so much of it is about identifying the value for the individual. So making it really personal in terms of, what is the benefit that the change will actually bring? In terms of what we do for government, I think there's a galvanising focus that when you join the public sector, I mean, I've come from private sector and come in. The reason I've done that is I'm totally committed to wanting to build a better country and build a better digital experience for citizens. So I think there's a kind of, I was listening in very closely to the last speakers in the last segment. And again, I think that commonality of mission and the commonality of purpose, that when you've got that shared kind of drive to the objective that you're looking to produce, whilst change is not necessarily comfortable, understanding your individual kind of role and your contribution through that change and the outcome that that brings, I think it makes it a lot easier for people to get on board. Because then people are able to genuinely kind of personalise where they fit in the entire picture and what they bring to it.
Great. And how do you, so if you're being driven by policy, often when people talk about having a mission and being mission driven, they talk about the benefit to the end customer or citizen in this instance. Is there any challenge between mapping those two? So your policy that's coming in and what's the actual end goal or end value for the citizen at the end?
Yes, there is. I think in terms of, we've kind of, through our research, we've identified that across all sort of government services, there are kind of 10 broad kind of points of focus that our citizens really want us to really zero in on. And this is relatively common to all kind of government services. And I think they're quite common to private sector services as well. Lifting those up and aligning it to the actual policy objectives is not, I don't think, that difficult. But just to give you an example of some of those kind of points of focus, some of the things are around just being able to find a single source of truth. Within a government, you've got lots and lots of different departments, different agencies. Therefore, there's a lot of different channels which are actually out there in the digital space, a lot of different content that's out there. We found, obviously through the COVID time last year, being able to bring that content together in a way that it was really easy to consume in a consistent manner was really critical. That's something we hear from citizens all the time. Just not knowing, not getting the right information in the right context at the right time. So making sure that, for me at my age, probably heading towards retirement, in terms of getting notifications from government around, starting my career, it's probably not the right messaging for me in my context. So making sure that that right information is provided and that it's more tailored and personalised. Our minister always sort of talks about our mission in the DTA and what we're doing in terms of government services. It's really making those services, simple, helpful, respectful, and being transparent in terms of respecting people's privacy and also respecting people's time. I think one of the things that I certainly recognise coming into the public sector, unlike other sort of digital channels that you might have in the private sector, where it is about creating a really content-rich experience for an individual that keeps the eyeballs on the site and keeps people engaged. For the most part, when people come in, they want to engage with government. They want to come in, get in quickly, get access to what they need to know, perform the transaction that they need, and get on with their lives. So much of what we do is about trying to strip out the complexity and the process in terms of what we're trying to deliver for the citizens. And I think, again, that alignment back to policy, if you focus in on those kind of pain points, again, like just not knowing, another one is, not knowing how to actually reach the outcome. So where to go and how to navigate. With government being relatively complex the way it's organised, a lot of our focus is on making sure that our citizens and customers don't need to know the departmental structure of how things are organised. The information is just brought to them for their purpose.
Great. I'm actually, just based on that response, I'm going to jump from people into technology.
Sure.
More questions, but the single source of truth, that's so common in a lot of large organizations. And I think it particularly touches on when you have decentralized teams, as we were talking about, that you might need a centralized platform for some of the core pieces of data or infrastructure. And often in enterprises, what they'll do is they'll create a team to manage that centralized platform, or the core team, as it's often called. Do you do something similar? Are you building out a single source of truth for citizens that other departments hook into, or how are you tackling that challenge?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, Rory. I think it's a real combination of being able to bring different approaches together to achieve the outcome. That we across the enterprise, there is a very distributed set of technology platforms that have been built over time. As is the case with most industries, there is still a considerable amount of legacy technology that's still in place. Making use of what we've already invested in, along with what we're planning to invest in, to be able to bring that together in a coherent model is really what we're looking to do with the architecture. So a lot of the architecture is driven by common platforms, but by platforms I don't mean necessarily products. It is about the capabilities that we need to be able to deliver government. An example of that is one of the projects that's been driven by the DTA over the last couple of years is around digital identity. Digital identity is seen as a kind of common need that is there to be able to bring together the way people interact with government services, where they provide their identity information once and are then able to leverage that to be able to access the services over and over. So again, the single source, it's not necessarily only about single source of truth. It's about making sure that our responsibility in the public sector is to absolutely protect the use of public money in terms of what we invest in. So again, it's not always about just putting in the latest and greatest and newest. It's about making sure that we've got a complete view of that entire ecosystem. So I know it's a kind of long answer, but it's not really about building just kind of a central capability that just does it for everyone else. It's about making use of the capabilities that we have right the way across government, so that the best placed part of government to be able to deliver a particular capability can get on and do that.
Great. Yeah, that's a brilliant segue actually into the process side of the people process technology piece. So enabling that is kind of helping other organizations, other departments to be able to adapt and go through their own digital transformations. I'm assuming that's part of the remit. That is one of the biggest challenges that I personally face in my career, because when companies are very set in their ways in a waterfall way of working, it can be very difficult to change the mindsets of the people at multiple levels in the organization. So if we start with, I guess, the senior or the C-suite or the senior leaders in the departments, how do you tackle that? And coming from, I guess, if I use the example of waterfall, would be very much, here's a budget, here's our fixed scope, here's our fixed time, to being more, here's our mission, here's our team, and let's iterate and move through it. So how do you tackle that shift in mindset?
Look, I think the mindset shift is, it is incredibly challenging. I think it has to be done at all kind of levels. One of the things out of my capability function in the DTA that we have is a digital profession, which was stood up in April of 2020, so still relatively new. But the digital profession looks to really be able to work at kind of all tiers of an individual's kind of career journey within the public sector. So from the very senior execs that may not have the deepest understanding of digital, agile kind of delivery techniques. Just what does what do the concepts mean? Why would you change from, again, that kind of waterfall mindset into being more iterative and thinking about learning from the evidence as you go through the process? And what are the opportunities that kind of brings, all the way through to the people that are really commencing their careers in the APS, where we have programs focused on graduates, cadets, apprentices, who are really just starting their kind of careers, and then specialists in areas like cyber that are looking to work within government. So we're trying to make sure that we're keeping kind of changing the mindset at both ends and also in the middle. Now, that does take some time, and there are definitely processes within government which are really well codified and have worked for a long period of time and have really stood the test of time as well. But I think what we found, and particularly after the events of 2020, I think we've just been forced to really think about things differently. The speed that we had to move at, the speed of delivery in 2020 was unlike anything that I've seen in government previously. I think the ability to kind of work remotely, and we heard in the previous session about people moving from the States to Singapore and still staying completely connected and being able to get that work done. I think it's kind of disrupted the delivery model and the mindset very rapidly. So personally, I feel like we're at a great time in hasn't been a great time last year, but the opportunity that it's brought is a real opportunity to really challenge the way that we do things and do things differently.
Yeah, it's a sentiment I'm hearing everywhere that it's not the CEO or the CTO driving digital transformation, it's COVID-19 that's driving it.
I think it's everybody though, and I do think again in the public sector, there's such a common purpose to want to just do things better and achieve better outcomes, and I think that galvanizes people behind that mission as well.
Great. So as you mentioned, the multiple levels that you need to tackle this at, and it is needed at all levels. Where do you begin? Where do you start when you start a new project and a new remit with a new department? How do you kick off your transformation?
I kind of have it's a pretty simple kind of philosophy, but if you don't start, you don't start. So you have to just start. I think quite often in government, there can be a propensity to sit back and really plan out. Again, if we go back to that waterfall mindset of thinking about what is the end outcome that I'm going to achieve, and then what are all the steps that we need to go through to actually achieve that. I think in terms of just the rapidity of having to be able to deliver faster, starting off with an evidence base that actually does make sense. I'll give you an example. One of the pieces of work that the teams have been working on here recently has been around experiencing a natural disaster. I mean, if we go back to January 2020, before COVID actually landed, we went through some of the worst bushfires we've ever seen in Australia. And the teams went through and modelled out, using like desktop research to start with, and I think there was between 1,000 and 1,500 pieces of kind of desktop research that they could tap into. What are the kind of experiences for citizens across a range of cohorts from preparing for a natural disaster, experiencing so what happens during a natural disaster, what happens after a disaster, then what happens when you kind of rebuild. So breaking it down into those kind of phases, and then thinking about what those kind of obstacles are, and then thinking about what the opportunities are. And I think that kind of very user-driven, user-centered design that puts the citizens' needs right at the center of what we do does allow people to be able to really kind of rally behind what that whole purpose is. And when you start to bring the MDTs and multidisciplinary teams together, from very, very senior people, policy people, technologists, process people, legislators together, they all bring very, very different perspectives, which constantly challenge your assumptions and thoughts that you have when you commence these processes. So again, it is by bringing that that mindset that allows you to not start with it has to be perfect and it has to be right the first time, and to allow it to iterate and to evolve, that is critical. And if you don't start somewhere, and it can be starting with a wrong set of assumptions that you may prove are wrong, that is still the start of the journey, rather than trying to plot out the perfect world that is going to be at the end of the rainbow that you never can achieve.
Great. So I think that's a perfect way of tackling it, and it's a great way of kind of, if you don't start, you end up in analysis paralysis. But how do you marry that with, you have to make sure you bring everybody along, so you're not just railroading people and forcing through change. And how do you marry up those two kind of almost seemingly contradictory approaches?
Yeah, it's not easy, and sometimes, Rory, it can be, it can be historical, or it can be personal biases that, may be a limiter to wanting to adopt change. But as I kind of said before, I do think it is about being able to, really personalise the value in it for the individuals to understand why is what we're doing really, really important. What is the difference it actually creates in somebody's life? I kind of I break things down in really kind of simple terms when I think about government. That if I was going to drop my kids off to school and it's 20 to 9 in the morning, and I've just got a notification from government to log onto my MyGov account, um, how long is it going to take me to actually do that? How long is it going to take me to complete that interaction? If I know it's going to take me 5 minutes, I'll probably do it there and then, because I know I can. If I don't know that, and it might take me half an hour, I may not get the kids to school. So again, the role that an individual then plays in terms of helping make that citizen's life better by just understanding how long it's going to take to do something, actually does give you a personal return in terms of kind of what you have delivered. I think the one of the most amazing things about working in the public sector is that you can genuinely see the impact of the work that you do on society. And I think it's easier, it's probably not easy in the private sector, but it is, you can measure that outcome that it actually creates. And knowing where you kind of fit within that whole process of creating and driving that better outcome is very rewarding. And I think that drives people to kind of get on the bus and be part of it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a great point about the, I guess, government being slightly different to just a profit company making a bit more money. But the question is coming from the audience as well, and this is one that I've struggled with myself, is you can sell the vision, you can sell okay, this is what we're trying to achieve, and everybody's on board, and then you go, well, let's just get started and let's do this bit. And I always get hit with the, well, what about? You just need to think about a bit more. You need to cover these edge cases. We can't move too quickly. We can't break things. So how do you move from that mindset where people are kind of used to, give me my 10-page requirements document and I'll make sure everything's in there and then I'll give you my blessing, to, well, actually, no, we're going to just start with this very small piece, make sure it works, and then iterate from there?
Yeah, I think, again, from a government perspective, there is a challenge that we are here to make sure that we achieve the best possible value for money for every citizen's dollar that's invested. So ensuring there is enough rigor and design and analysis to make sure that the dollar is not going to be wasted is really, really important. But also making sure that you develop out those kind of early proof of concepts that are able to test the value that's actually delivered by a service or a change that's being proposed, that you can then build upon to unlock further value. So a lot of what we kind of do at the moment is thinking about, again, those capability platforms. How could they be leveraged in different scenarios? How would they maybe mean that we don't have to then go off and build or procure or stand up a different system for a capability that might be used in a completely different context. And again, identity is a really good case in point there. But it is a balance, and it is a challenge. But again, I think in terms of digital transformation, the opportunity is so fast moving, and even if I just think about the technology tools that are available, the value that can be unlocked changes so rapidly. Again, it does come back to that kind of philosophy of just making sure that we start. But it's starting, but making sure we start and we do it with caution as well.
Great. And do you have any tips for any people that might be encountering that kind of a blocker where they're trying to kick off some initiative just to get something started, but they keep getting pushed back against do the full rigor and do the full analysis?
I think engage early, engage often with the stakeholders is really critical. I think engaging with the most likely kind of blockers that you may be able to identify to find out actually what those macro or micro level objections might actually be. Quite often you find that it's not actually, you might get an area that might say, oh, you can't do that because your legislation says you can't. And you actually then start to work through the legislation, and you kind of find, well, you know what, the legislation is actually an enabler of this. It's not actually a blocker. And what we've found over time that folklore has kind of taken over from the law, and that's become the rules. But so I think taking the time to unpack those objections, and if they are material and they are warranted, again, the ability to demonstrate, I think, that humility that in the DTA, it's not about being right. It's about actually delivering the best services to citizens. So again, challenging those hypotheses at the start and challenge that early, I think, is really critical. The other thing I would say in terms of a tip is, work in the open as much as possible. Make sure that there's genuine visibility to all the stakeholders around what you're planning to do, what the intent is. And if people disagree, they will be vocal, and they will stand up early. And it's better to know that at the start of the process than later on. But that co-design, the collaboration, bringing people into the design process, I think is critical.
Great. There's a follow-up question that I think is really interesting. It's great when things are within your control and your remit. Have you had any challenges dealing with third-party providers in this kind of more iterative way of working? And have you had to do any contractual changes or anything like that to manage the relationships with third parties?
Yeah, look, this is such a it's such a dynamic ecosystem, and it's the reason that by one of our kind of pillars when I mentioned people, process, technology, policy, legislation. The other one was around alliances, and alliances really does speak to that broader ecosystem in terms of within the public sector. We can't do this on our own. We really do need the help of our technology partners, delivery partners. We need the innovators that are bringing the new and different ideas to us in terms of what we can do. Making sure that we've got contractual frameworks in place that provide the kind of flexibility to be able to have SMEs work with us as well as really large kind of multinationals is really, really important. And another part of the DTA kind of outside of my area does look at those sort of, the strategic kind of sourcing arrangements for digital within government. And through that, there's through the marketplace that the DTA runs, the majority of the work that kind of does flow through that goes through to the sort of SME areas within the market. Some of our more coordinated procurements, will centre in on the largest kind of volume areas that where we have multiple transactions in government. So areas like with Microsoft with their licensing, because there is a common need across the different departments and agencies. But I'm saying that on the contractual areas, it changes all the time, and we're constantly kind of hearing from the market in terms of what works for them. We have a digital sourcing network that we also coordinate within the DTA that works right the way across government to kind of identify what's working, what's not working, where are the barriers at the moment, how can we refine it, is there an opportunity for something at a whole government level, is there something where maybe an agency might take a lead because they've got a specialist capability. So it's a genuinely multi-pronged kind of approach. Again, really complex, but the intent is to be able to bring the best outcomes for government and the market.
Great. The one example that comes to mind, just based on your response there, that I heard the Irish government recently, when they produced their COVID Act, one of their conditions when they went to contract for it was that it had to be open source. And the reasoning behind that was because A, it's government, so they were saying, well, this is taxpayer funded, so it should be open, and B, it was building the trust because you're asking for a lot of data from people. Yeah. Is that something that you're looking at?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think open source has been a strong objective of the Australian government for a long period of time. There's been a lot of work over since the time that I've been here in terms of work around, if I take digital identity, for example, of making sure that identity framework and the design and everything else is done in the open so that people can really get a view of privacy and the controls and risk and security, and make their own assessments. And I think that's critical. I think what we do recognise within government, we are certainly, if I come back to those kind of high level priorities within government, the government is an economic enabler and should be an economic enabler for the country. So whatever we can do that allows, further kind of innovation to build upon the work that we do, I think is really important.
Great. So yeah, I want to, as I said at this earlier on, I want to come back to people. So I'm just going to jump back to the people side of things. Because one of the biggest challenges that I face, again, in trying to change around the processes, is people are saying, well, you're moving my cheese, or who moved my cheese, that kind of thing, that yesterday my job role was to do this. Now you're saying today my job is to do this. So I'm talking probably more at the team level, the individual contributors of the team. Government can have a bad reputation for people not being too flexible, whether that's earned or not. I won't go into that, but how do you deal with the people who are actively changing and asking them to shift from, maybe instead of waiting for a very specified requirements document, to get involved and talk to customers and find out their needs?
Yeah, look, we're doing a lot there. Again, if I come back to kind of the profession and what it's kind of designed to enable for digital practitioners within government, I don't think there has been in the past necessarily frameworks or approaches that have allowed people to really sort of take control of their own careers and kind of map where they want to go. So we've been doing a lot of work in recent times in conjunction with people like the APSC within government to look at things like just how do you actually map out what a digital professional looks like, what are those kind of roles, and then the skills that you might actually need to work within government. And we've gone through and we've mapped more than 150 kind of digital roles across government. We've taken that back to the Skills for the Information Age and Sophia 7 kind of framework to underpin that, to be able to kind of get a common language and taxonomy around what those kind of skills actually are. Then we've done some good beta work around thinking about career pathfinders in terms of where might I want to go with a career, what are the skills that I would actually need to bring to that, to be able to kind of help navigate where they go within the public sector to achieve their own personal outcomes. So that's kind of like at a personal level. I think the other part is, within government is, and I've certainly seen this since I've come in, I think there has been a big change over time from the previous perceptions that I think there are a lot more open conversations had with individuals about what the opportunities might look like. Particularly in digital, it is changing all the time. When we think about what our kind of current skills and capabilities are, where we need to be in maybe 6 months, 12 months, 5 years, that it's a really dynamic change. And part of that is getting the individuals ready to be able to have those kind of diverse careers that it's unlikely that you'll come in with one skill set at the start and by the end of your career just have that same skill set.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm a big fan of what you call T-shaped people. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term, but where you have a very deep speciality in one area, but a broad understanding of multiple areas. So when you were mapping out those 150 roles, did you factor in that kind of thing, that instead of kind of saying that this role is very rigid in this area, that there's a little bit of fluidity for other areas?
There has to be that flexibility within there, and there has to be, even when you start to break down a role type into skills, the priority of those skills will change depending on the circumstances or the actual work that an individual may actually be doing. So whereas you might need a group of 10 skills to kind of be able to do a role as a generic level, to actually be able to do what you need to do within a particular context, the focus might be on the first three. So again, that needs to be really nuanced. But the other thing is making sure that you've got a kind of common understanding, or at least a common sort of foundation to work from, where, and I think this is a real challenge that we face in digital, not only in the public sector, but everywhere. Just the language that we speak quite often, the terminology that I will use in my context will be completely different to your terminology. So if I use a simple term like system, what that actually means to me might mean something completely different to you. If I talk about a role type, service designer, what that means to me may be something completely different to you. starting off with a definition that defines kind of the descriptors and the skills behind that role type. You might vehemently disagree with that, but at least you've got a reference point to disagree from. Without that reference point, again, when I say service designer and you say service designer, we could be talking about completely different things.
Yeah, exactly. Do you, out of interest, do you publish those roles for the industry to see, or are they?
Yeah, they're out in the public domain.
Great. I'm personally interested. I might look those up and have a read through.
And also, I was saying that too, Rory. We're doing a lot of work with. I think there are industry associations out there that have done their own kind of skills models. There's a whole broad range of private sector organisations that have kind of come at this from different angles. We've got other professional organisations which are doing this as well. One of the things I find coming into kind of my role, the whole capability space, it's an incredibly complex, multifaceted kind of beast. And the more you kind of get out there and you talk to different individuals, the more, the broader your perspectives actually become.
Great. We have literally 1 minute left. Do you want to leave on a success or something that's something you're really proud of that the department has achieved?
Look, I think the success is still kind of been in the role for 7 or 8 months. The biggest thing for me, like just the excitement of working in such an incredible area where you have the ability to drive such broad social change. The complexity, the chaos of so many moving parts is what makes it just so exciting. And again, coming along to events like this, it is working with so many brilliant, talented people out there, both within the sector and beyond, that you can learn from just to approach things differently and achieve really good things.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, Scott. I do think it is a really interesting mission that you have there, and I wish you the best of luck in continuing.
Thank you so much, Rory.